Okay, guten Tag, boker tov, sabach khir. Is there any other language that I missed? My name is Michael Epstein. I'm currently a Martin Buber fellow here at the Hebrew University. And soon I will also begin teaching at the Arabic Language and Literature Department and the Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies Department. So I guess this is why I was invited to be a chairman, because I am belong somehow to the to the tradition, the origins of which we are discussing in this very interesting workshop or conference. So thank you for inviting me. So far the lectures have been really fascinating, at least for me, and I hope they will be fascinating today too. So our first lecturer has joined us from the University of Colorado, right? And she has just landed a few hours ago, so be gentle with her. Do you want a cup of coffee? Or
No, I haven't.
Yoni, you keep
Keep her awake.
Okay. Liora Halperin is an assistant professor of history and Jewish studies at the University of Colorado, as I said. Her areas of research are modern Jewish history, history of Zionism, Jewish nationalism, the history of the Yishuv, Palestine, the State of Israel, with emphasis, like our next speaker, on the connection between, if I understand correctly, between language and language politics, society, sociology. Liora was an assistant professor also at Princeton University. And before that, at Yale University. Postdoc at Yale University, and your PhD was from UCLA.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And her most recent book from 2014, Yale University Press, has a very interesting title, Babel in Zion. Jews, Nationalism, and Language Diversity in Palestine, 1920 to 1948. I haven't read the book, unfortunately, yet, but it explores Jews, the complex and often ambivalent discussions of Jews about languages other than Hebrew, that is Yiddish, German, Arabic, and English, during the several decades leading up to 1948. And Liora is currently working on a project of representations of early Zionist violence, heroism, and victimhood during the late Ottoman and British Mandate periods in Palestine. And today we will be hearing about the university, the school, the kibbutz, and the street, contending sites of Ashkenazi Jewish Arabic learning in Mandate Palestine.
Okay, great. Good. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm looking forward to meeting everybody here at the table as the day goes on. I'm going to be speaking today to try to paint a picture, a broad map of the various, often intertwined but also often separate spaces in which Jews who did not already know Arabic were learning Arabic and confronting Arabic in some way in their lives. Increasing physical and institutional separation under the British Mandate between Jews and Arabs, whether Christian or Muslim, did not make Arabic disappear from Ashkenazi Jewish consciousness. Rather, what it did is shift Arabic into particular spaces, social spaces. Quotidian contact between Jews and Arabs in neighborhoods, language classes in Jewish communities, propaganda operations, and military intelligence. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say is going to overlap in pieces with some of the other presentations over the course of the day. This range of spaces, though limited, defined a sphere of Jewish-Arab interaction in Palestine and later in Israel, that was an object of continual Jewish reflection. As Gil Eyal has pointed out, and Yoni here has also worked on, this intercommunal distance resulted in the cultivation of cadres of Orientalists and Arabists whose expertise lay in their knowledge and use of Arabic. These experts served as the kernel of Israeli intelligence and Arab affairs services after the state was created in 1948 and even before. But nonetheless, and this is part of my particular point today, emphasizing only those who mastered Arabic and deployed it professionally excludes the story of a larger subset of Jewish society that continued to seek some degree of proficiency, finding meaning in token or symbolic contacts, even in some cases without much knowledge of Arabic at all. Even partial competence or theoretical desires for competence were meaningful in a society of Ashkenazi Jews concerned with their ability or inability to cope with the native land that they were coming to. So for me, thinking about this broader meaning of Arabic for Ashkenazi Jews is part of some of my larger work, which we heard about here, thinking about a context suffused with multiple language questions and language pressures. So this paper maps 4 spaces of contact. Jewish contact with Arabic in the region of Tel Aviv and Jaffa, community Arabic courses offered to and often requested by kibbutz dwellers and other local communities. Third, the Zionist Arabic newspapers intended to shape Arab public opinion. And fourth, intelligence and military operations that gathered information about communal goings-on through the use of Jews, often Middle Eastern Jews, who knew Arabic. You might notice that German Orientalists per se are not the central or only topic of the material I'm going to present. And part of my argument is that they're not the whole story. And yet they pop up continuously. German Orientalism, mainly centered at the Hebrew University, was just one node of a broader grassroots project to know or to deploy Arabic, one that often employed Orientalist assumptions of its own, even if they didn't come from exactly the same place. Also, I'm not focusing a lot on Sfaradim and their role in this operation, although I know Avigail Jakobson is going to be talking about that too. So let's start with some of these unorganized contacts. The trajectory of development in Palestine and in Tel Aviv and Jaffa in particular did move in the direction of communal separation. And frequent conflicts, especially from the 1920s, meant that neither community was inclined to emphasize cooperation or good relations. But nonetheless, the principle of physical separation did not occlude all contact. Starting very early from the choice of Achuzat Bayit members to hire Arab laborers to build their homes, Tel Aviv saw a persistent flow of laborers. Much of the texture of these encounters is recoverable only through oral histories, which can be problematic in their own way. But nonetheless, if we forego a concern with the legitimacy of their claims of Arabic fluency, oh, I was fluent in Arabic, and presume that memories of Arabic knowledge reflect at least a minimal familiarity with the language, we can learn a lot about the dynamics involving Arabic between children, men, and women, and the simultaneous curiosity, revulsion, and distancing that would overshadow or at least accompany more formal engagement with Arabic in institutional settings. So let me give you just a little taste of some of this oral history material, and I have quite a lot of it in my book. Some of these language contacts occurred between children. So one interview with a woman named Rivka Rabinovich grew up in Tel Aviv. She recalls having Arab friends, many of whom were the children of household helpers or laundresses. So we start to see a kind of economic hierarchy going on here. Economic contacts led to subsidiary language contacts, and she claims, I spoke fluent Arabic, one of these claims. Another man named Tzvi El-Peleg, born in Poland in 1926, lived in an area which is now the Florentine neighborhood, where Bedouins lived, and recalled, quote, there simply wasn't anyone to talk with other than children whose language was Arabic, and I began to speak Arabic then. What sort of judgments did Jewish children, Ashkenazim in this case, form as a result of these happenstance encounters? So I found that a repeated trope in these oral histories, which we also find in the labor Zionist camp more generally, is a divide between friendly and unfriendly Arabs, coupled with a sense that personal relations could persist despite the corrosive presence of anti-Jewish violence, which was apparently to them perpetrated by some other Arabs besides the ones that they happened to know. So another oral history, Tzipora Brenner, 6 years old when she came to Tel Aviv, recalled, quote, "Arabs would bring eggs and excellent vegetables. On the other hand, they also stole things from us. During the day they were friendly, apparently, maybe not the same Arabs." In this dynamic, individual friendly Arabs were seen as influential in protecting Jews from their apparently violent counterparts. A woman named Shoshana Kirstein from Ravno remembers that in 1929, one day her father Moshe went to Jaffa to buy vegetables, was approached by an Arab acquaintance of the family named Ibrahim. He said, "Musa, Musa," she's remembering, "they're going to do something over there. Run home to your wife and kids and don't come anymore." Ibrahim also offered to walk Shoshana home. And she remembers he offered to talk with me. And he says, "Walk behind me," he said, "so they won't think you are walking with an Arab." We had good relations with the Arabs, she concluded. In these cases, a claim of Arabic knowledge was part of the story, the final evidence for her that the relations were legitimate and fruitful. Now, the veracity of these claims is not at issue. Some of this may not have happened, or it may not have happened the way they recall. What's telling here is the constructed impression that language enabled and reflected a type of Jewish-Arab encounter that was positive, but also importantly, one that left the Jew in a position of control, or a feeling of control. These encounters were haphazard, and the language gains supposedly made were not lasting. Those who claimed to be fluent in Arabic earlier inevitably no longer knew the language when they were interviewed decades later. Boundaries between communities were strictly held. And also, and I hinted at this a second ago, they were demonstrably not stories of equals. Every one of them has a hierarchical dimension. The Jew sometimes condescends to use Arabic as part of a civilizing mission, or sometimes the Jew is clearly the more civilized of the pair, for example, in the case of the Arab walking behind the Jewish girl. So, to move on to the second part of this presentation, narratives of these happenstance urban encounters coexist with and also provide a backdrop for more concerted efforts on the part of the Zionist establishment to bring Arabic knowledge to Jewish communities and deploy this knowledge to improve relations between Jewish settlements and neighboring Arab villages. So Yosef Eliyahu Shalush, who is a head of the Sephardic Jewish community, we might hear about him more later, he wrote in his memoirs that Ashkenazim simply did not understand the importance of neighborly relations. But while Shalush was correct to note that labor Zionists often, or overall, botched their attempts at neighborly relations, Shalush was wrong to assume that European Jews ceased to care about it. Indeed, even as relations became increasingly strained and violent, segments of the Jewish community persisted in often naive reflections about precisely such relations or their absence. And thinking about these relations nearly always involved thoughts about the utility of Arabic, the language, as a bridging device. In a climate of overall opposition to foreign language study in schools, by which I mean European languages, Arabic courses were somewhat welcome. And I deal with this at length when I write about some of the educational dimensions of language questions. One key player in this organized push for Arabic literacy was the Jewish Agency, which took an even more organized role beginning in the late 1930s under the oversight of Moshe Shertok, otherwise known as Sheret, and Eliyahu Sasson, who were fielding a large number of requests for local Arabic courses. Members of the department and reports sent to it stressed the importance of rigor, of small classes, of informal speaking opportunities. But a focus on this top-down implementation of what the Jewish Agency said obscures the fact that the political department also promoted Arabic because communities had been requesting assistance for some time. The archives of the Jewish Agency contain hundreds of letters addressed to the Arab department requesting Arabic teachers in cities, towns, and kibbutzim. So take one 1944 letter from Kibbutz Gan Shlomo, which reads, quote, "We are turning to you to please help us organize in our kibbutz courses in Arabic. Our location is surrounded by Arab villages, and in the field of Arabic knowledge we are very behind." In response, the Jewish Agency received reports of personal visits between Jewish settlements and Arab villages. In a romanticized scene from Dawara, reminiscent, perhaps ominously, of the first American Thanksgiving, produce was exchanged, and all discussed their hope that the coming year would bring peace that would relieve all of humanity, and that all would merit good neighborly relations. The desire for personal knowledge seems to have emerged from and contributed to the sense that individuals could transcend political conflict precisely by leaving the academic sphere and engaging in dialogue. Organizations associated with Mapai supported colloquial Arabic courses as well, including mail order courses. But it's Hashomer Tzair, which discussed the value of Arabic education perhaps more than any other labor group. Their newspapers were known to publish Arabic corners with phrases and dialogues in Arabic, often written both in Arabic script and Hebrew transliteration. The Cultural Committee of Kibbutz Kfar Masaryk reported in May 1936 the inception of an Arabic language course and anticipated that the demand would be so great that the class would be split into two sections. These grand expectations, however, were not fulfilled, both a product of limited funding and students' apparent lack of perseverance. The numbers of students dwindled, and it seemed that funding was about to run out. So here we have aspirations and limitations in the realm of practice. As part of his work establishing the Shomer Tzair Arab department, Eliezer Be'eri, who was also Ernst Bauer before he changed his name, advocated for basic courses in spoken Arabic just as other kibbutz members had. In a request to Sasson, back at the Jewish Agency, Be'eri wrote that he had visited two Shomer Tzair kibbutzim, learned that there was, quote, an urgent need for an Arabic teacher. The Arab department also sought to actualize these contexts by conducting a 6-month seminar in the Druze village of Osfia, which began in June 1941. A series of photographs that I found chronicle the experience of the group. These participants were young, they were idealistic, and they believed that labor cooperation between the two populations would bring about peaceful relations. So for them, Arabic was right at the center of a much larger set of hopes and dreams and ideals. At the same time, the Jewish Agency fielded requests for more programs that went beyond language acquisition to focus on understanding Arab society, culture, and history. In this case, often without any contact with native speakers, and often with the involvement of Hebrew University Orientalists. And now we see some of these connections. The requirements of Jewish settlement, the thinking went, had drawn Jews away from natural interchange with Arabs, which had existed in a mythological earlier period. But they thought the introduction of methodical study could build a different kind of knowledge about Palestinian Arabs based on knowledge of facts rather than people. Such methods had a central place in left-leaning circles as well, some of the same people so explicit about the importance of human contact. While Be'eri was promoting practical language courses, he also was concerned to build a more regimented program of historical and cultural studies based on the methods of Orientalism he had learned while a student at the University of Berlin between 1932 and 1935. So he wrote in 1940 that each teacher in his Arab department's language courses, quote, needs to have a comprehensive knowledge and scientific education, or scholarly education, and also didactic experience and ability, a formulation that implied that only really a European-trained Orientalist would be suited for the job. Be'eri emphasizes on the one hand that he rejected, quote, the romantic attitude which saw Arabs as the heroes of the 1001 Nights, but in his source book, which he used for education, was clearly enamored with European models of systematic study. He offered an apology for including so many non-Hebrew books on his syllabus, but he wrote that really the British not only have command of the Middle East, they also have written the best books about it, in particular about its history and its problems in the modern period. So learning Arabic was an inwardly focused project to help Jews, many of them not especially engaged with life Arab neighbors, help them understand that which appeared foreign and threatening, and better connect with those they did know. These efforts, however, were closely interwoven with more deliberate attempts to exploit Arabic knowledge to communicate Zionist positions to Arabs. So now I'm turning to the third part of the presentation about propaganda. Newspapers in the modern era, as Benedict Anderson points out, were tools in disseminating national ideas and cultivating national conscience in populations of people who spoke and read the same language. But European powers soon realized that media and communications were also powerful means of reaching foreign populations. Propaganda efforts, which were sometimes known as information warfare or winning the hearts and minds, were typically imperial projects employed by empires in their heyday that sensed that their power might be in decline. The Zionist propaganda effort had a much smaller scale, but it occurred in some ways in a similar context. Propaganda efforts were a mainstay of the Zionist movement from its early years. In the late Ottoman period, such efforts were dominated by Sephardi intellectuals, who, because of their proficiency in Arabic, could be personally involved in crafting persuasive text without non-Jewish Arab middlemen. So Nissim Malul was involved in this project, as was Avraham el-Maliach. Though I should say that the impressions of coexistence and optimism in this group must be tempered by recognizing that a group such as Chevrat Magen, which was a Sephardi group working through the Arab press, also often had negative impressions of many ordinary Arabs, and similar to Zionists, felt pretty certain that Zionist settlement was ultimately good for Palestinians. I think Abigail will talk about this more. This combination of short-lived propaganda efforts continued through much of the Mandate period, as well as central Ashkenazi labor Zionist bodies got involved, the Histadrut, Jewish Agency, the Vad Haleumi. For decades, they discussed the need to put out newspaper materials in Arabic, though they had trouble figuring out how to put the project into action. In the 1920s and 30s, barely a month went by without discussions about how they might influence the existing Arab papers. As of April 1936, the general Arab labor strike was causing leaders across the labor spectrum to feel increasingly dubious about turning Arab workers towards Zionism. But that year, a group of some of the most prominent leaders met again to discuss the feasibility of putting out a newspaper in Arabic. By December, it was decided that the Histadrut, which had briefly published another Arabic paper in the 20s, Ittihad al-Ummal, would host the newspaper, and they set up a funding organization, and therein began the newspaper Hakikat al-Amr, the truth of the matter. 1937 it first came out. The mode of distribution would be largely through Jews, Jewish coffee shops, Jewish doctors, but it would also be sold in kiosks, by mail, and to Arab teachers. The paper would be a joint production. Michael Asaf was one of the editors, as was Eliyahu Agassi, who was of Iraqi origin. Other Jews of Arab origin also worked in the office, Nissim Malul, Yitzchak Shamosh, and others. And records also indicate, and this is from the Lavon archive, I'm trying to kind of give you a sense of the different sets of archival material here, also indicate that some number of Palestinian Arabs were recruited to help in some way in the compilation, editing, and distribution of the newspaper. The first issue was published 24 March 1937 with a typically labor Zionist note to the reader, and this is of course in Arabic. This is the English translation. Any unbiased person must acknowledge the great creative enterprise of the Hebrew people in its sole and eternal homeland. The enterprise has brought blessing to all the residents, disproved all speculations about the country's observative capacity, broadened and continues to broaden opportunities for the good of the whole country. The paper exhibited a heavy editorial hand, if it's not already clear, stating explicitly how events should be interpreted and questioning the interpretations offered by others. When it cited articles from some dominant Arab papers, for example, Palestine, it often questioned their veracity. It's not actually true, they might say. How did the editors of the paper conceive of this outright promotion? Michael Asaf said in 1937 that the goal, quote, was to fight the journalistic monopoly of the Arab insiders, quote, unquote, through what he called, quote, objective and Zionist reporting. The Arabic paper was the next step in what was by that point an evolving Zionist and later Israeli tradition of hasbara, explaining. We might call it propaganda. While the rhetoric of personal contact anticipated and sought connections, the voices behind the newspaper stressed that Arabic could enable Jews to undertake a one-way public relations project of explaining Zionism to Arabs. Now, interestingly, in a statement from 1941, Asaf was careful to distinguish what he thought of as mere propaganda from what he thought of as true or empirical evidence. The goal, he wrote, was, quote, explaining, haspara, our undertaking in the country, not simply by propaganda, ta'amula, but by demonstrating our activities and deeds to the Arabs by way of emphasizing the positive value of these activities. So if we want to talk about the history of Israeli haspara, we need to look in part at some of this material. The Stadrut did its best to gather evidence that this propaganda paper was working. They collected letters from Arab readers who testified to the importance of the paper. So they found some guy named Mahmoud Yaqub in Tulkarem who wrote, quote, I read the first issue of your paper and found that Hakikat al-Amar is a free newspaper that has important articles, particularly on the oppressed workers' movement. I was very pleased with this phenomenon. The desire to show that the propaganda was actually changing minds in the Arab community persisted even as relations plummeted. Now, these pro-Histadrut comments on the part of Palestine's Arabs might appear suspicious, if not simply fabricated, and indeed we learn more from them about the hopes and dreams of the Histadrut more than the real experience of the Palestinian community. Nonetheless, we do know from the work of Hillel Cohen that the networks of Arab-Jewish collaboration were extensive and that internal Palestinian divides in certain cases made receptiveness to certain Zionist groups feel contextually appropriate or feasible. In any case, just as individuals in Tel Aviv could be convinced of the possibility of coexistence by individual Arabs who appeared well disposed to them, propagandists as well found sufficient evidence of support and collaboration so as to make their vision of potential coexistence not seem entirely fanciful. Now finally, I want to turn to military intelligence before I close. Ultimately, and in retrospect, the trajectory of Jewish engagement with Arabic led not towards reconciliation, but towards military intelligence. Militaristic responses to Jewish-Arab conflict are most associated with revisionist Zionists, but the labor movement, too, developed, of course, its own systems of military preparedness as well as intelligence. By the end of the Mandate period, such activities were occurring under the auspices of the Shai and its Shachar unit of Mistarvim. These usually were Jews from Arab countries who dressed as and acted as Arabs or non-Jewish Arabs. The revisionists had their Delek division, also doing military intelligence. Some of them were quite extensive in their networks that reached around the Arab world. The Shai was founded in 1939 to 1940 by Ezra Danin, formed to organize Jewish individuals in, quote, getting to know Arabs, or akarat Arabim, and creating contacts and cultivating relations. Language was at the center of these individuals' activities. A certain hierarchy of knowledge was reflected in a social hierarchy. And this is something others have written about, that military organizations used native Arabic-speaking Jews for lower-level information gathering while employing European Jews in higher-level analysis. Mistarvim, writes Gamliel Cohen, who was a Mistarev at one point, were, quote, Hebrew Zionist Palestinian-born fighters who were able to mix in and even act for short or long periods of time within the Arab population. Over the course of some time, he said in an interview, we gained experience with the Arabs. I came to understand their mentality, their characteristics, and ways of fighting. Right? And this kind of rhetoric of coming to know or coming to master the Arab mind is something we find fairly widespread. Intelligence activities thus required a spurious intimacy that employed the terms of friendship, understand, and recognize for the purposes of classifying a foe. Both the Haganah and Irgun privileged systematic knowledge over personal contacts, but depended on the latter, and indeed, in the process of learning and teaching Arabic for intelligence purpose, found common cause with those on left-wing kibbutzim or the Istadrut who claimed to be using Arabic for peaceful or propagandistic aims. So lest we think that these are entirely separate spheres, they actually intertwine in really interesting ways. Shimon Somech, his once called the spiritual father of the Mistaqvim, was also engaged in other kinds of Arabic language activities, including community language education for the Istadrut and the Shomer Tza'ir. This nexus of casual encounter, local learning, propaganda, and intelligence became part of the classic narrative of Zionist engagement with what was often called the Arab question. In hindsight, those who did know Arabic were set apart from their peers. They seemed to be serving the Zionist cause. They seemed to be engaged in a deeply patriotic act. So let me conclude here by saying that despite the increasing militarization of Arabic, the language continued, maybe counterintuitively, to symbolize the closure of distance. Arabic could point either to a golden past from which contemporary relations had declined, or to a utopian future, usually, fancifully, in which Palestinian Arabs would give up their opposition to Zionism. For scholars of classical Islamic history at the Hebrew University, this ideal past was often located in medieval Baghdad or Cordoba, where Jewish exegetes wrote in Arabic, and Hebrew poets drew from the Arabic poetic tradition. As Levi Billig, faculty here at the Hebrew University, wrote, "It is felt that understanding of common cultures leads to mutual sympathy, such as existed between Jews and Muslims in the Middle Ages." Now, advocates of a more personal, colloquial relationship with Arabs also alluded to the past, but in their case to the more recent past, the late Ottoman period. In any case, the early period of Zionist settlement was later portrayed as a golden age of Jewish-Arab coexistence that, even if it was deliberately overturned by some Zionist policy decisions, represented an ideal or idealized moment that was later disrupted. Thus, when Hebrew University Orientalists alluded to Jewish-Muslim coexistence in the medieval period, a 1946 article in the Hebrew newspaper Aboker reflected, "We must not forget that the first immigrants to Palestine from the West to stake a claim in the land of our forefathers were welcomed in brotherhood and friendship by the Arab residents of the land." The rosy image of Arab-Jewish relations deployed in 1946 regarding the late Ottoman period sometimes is even redeployed later to refer to the pre-state years itself. So we have these layers of nostalgia that get stacked on top of each other. Arabic use oriented towards Jewish-Arab contact, whether in academic circles, lay learners, or among native speaker intelligence or propaganda efforts, occurred with the assumption with the greater linguistic contacts in the past correlated with better political relations, and conversely, declining language abilities reflected, if not precipitated, political strife. Arabic knowledge and use seemed, to all of these groups of people, though in different ways, an antidote to both the loss of a past coexistence and the apparent possibility, or maybe impossibility, of future harmony. But Hebrew-Arabic symbiosis, idyllic and symbolic though it may have been in rhetoric, was never really an operative goal of any but the most fringe of these language operations. In the cases that we surveyed, Arabic actually stood for and negotiated the appearance, often unwelcome, within a properly all-Jewish environment, the effort to make this local other familiar, and the desperate and ultimately impossible attempt to stave off its attacks through language, both literal violence and also unwelcome political pressure. Zionists were continually a reminder that their construct of a Hebrew Zion, a new homeland, was itself a foreign presence in an Arabic-speaking Palestine. It was a homeland that could penetrate but could not erase the multilingual space that it had entered. Thank you.
Thank you, Liora. I think we'll continue to the next lecture and have questions. Time for questions afterwards. So, next speaker is Dr. Yoni Mendel. Jonathan Mendel works in Van Leer Institute as the head of the Center for Jewish-Arab Relations. Is that how it's called in English?
Well, it's a new one, but you should start with Franz Rosenzweig.
Yeah, no, I'm leaving the best for last.
Yes,
But
indeed.
Jewish-Arab relations, and is one of the editors of the JLS, which is the Journal of Levant Studies.
Levantine
Studies.
The book review section.
The book review section. Okay. And he is
What is the paper you mentioned?
JLS, Journal of Levantine Studies. It's a relatively new journal of the Van Leer Institute. Dr. Mendel is currently a postdoc fellow at, as he said, at the Minerva Center in Franz Rosenzweig Institute. His PhD he finished in the Middle Eastern Studies Department of Cambridge University. He wrote his PhD under Professor Yasser Suleiman. His PhD came out as a book entitled The Creation of Israeli Arabic, Political and Security Considerations in the Making of Arabic Language Studies in Israel. I must admit I began reading the book. It's very depressing. It's a very good book. I don't think it will be easy for all of people here in Israel who have some connection with Arabic studies to read this book. I'm not sure we would agree with everything written in it, but I think it's an extremely important book. And I'm really surprised that up until now nothing like this has been really written. The book deals with the political history of Arabic studies in Palestine and in Israel. That is from from the 1930s to the more or less the 1980s and a bit beyond. In this book, Dr. Mendel analyzes the political and security networks that came to affect and form the way Arabic was and still is studied in Israel, in the educational system, in schools, and in other areas. Currently, Yoni is working on the Arabic studies in during the Mandate period. In the Jewish educational system in the Mandate period, that is the 20s, 30s, 40s, I guess. And he's also involved, one last thing, in important projects that have to do with reforming the way Arabic is studied here in Israel. And I can give one example that we in the Arabic department here are benefiting from its fruit is a project that wants to introduce conferences in universities in Israel in Arabic. Yoni is trying to promote that successfully so far. I hope he will continue succeeding.
Thank you very much.
Tfaddal.
I swear that he was very kind with me and that it was his decision to elaborate so much. Thank you, Michael. Also, I would say because I respect Professor Sasson Somech a lot, and he told me that every time that you hear someone speaks about the Staravim unit of the Palmach and that the name Shimon Somech will be mentioned, you should say En Kesher, no connection, no connection. So I'm not saying that Sasson Somech, and I wish him also to that. And so he says there is no connection between Shimon Somech and Sasson Somech. It was very important for him to say this. About the book, I will say yes, that the book was published lately. It deals in a way with something that is we can consider to be an elephant in the room, because a lot is being discussed about the connection between Arabic and security, Arabic and military intelligence, Arabic and national kind of considerations, but yet a book that is kind of dedicated, or a research dedicated to this specific topic and connection has yet to be made. And I'm sure, as you said, that it's not going to be a fun book to read, but I hope that it will raise some debate. And also I think that it's not a book that kind of is pointing blame, but it's more kind of, it asks to revise or to rethink the way that we are studying Arabic today, and to ask questions whether considerations that were true in the 50s and the 60s and 70s should also lead us in 2015.
Can you speak to the microphone?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. But this was only a trigger because I'm not going to speak about the book today. Since I arrived to Franz Rosenzweig, I learned how much I don't know about the topic that I thought that I know about. And knowledge of German, for example, or focusing on the German tradition, and on the fact that I wrote about people who started or initiated a lot of the main ideas in Arabic studies, main programs like Professor Plessner and like Professor Kister and like Professor Artur Biram, without actually studying their origins or their main ideas about the study of the language. I felt that it is a lacuna. Now I know it is a lacuna that had to be bridged, and hopefully today I will be able to share with you some of this information. I will focus on the Hebrew Reali School in Haifa, not just because it's a good school, but because it was such an important school in the field of Arabic language studies in the British Mandate up until this day. It was an important school not only vis-a-vis Arabic studies, but it was generally a pioneering, leading school in the evolving education system, Jewish education system in Palestine, Israel, Eretz Israel. We can think about all kind of projects that kind of brought together Eretz, the land, the people, and the education system. And also, according to Biram, that I will later speak a little bit about, it was about creating or civil servants, or creating the servants of the state. Sorry, לייצר משרתים עבור המדינה. It wasn't like civil servants as we understand it today, but to create people that will serve the country, the emerging country, whatever this country needs, the school will be there for this. We can look at a few of the projects of the Hebrew Reali School. One of them is משוטטים בכרמל, of Aryeh Kruch, that eventually Koch. Yes. Also, I'm really grateful that we have a lot of people here that have better information than me, so especially with pronunciation. Aryeh Kruch, משוטטים בכרמל, that eventually became to what we know today as משוטטי בכרמל. אחרי זה אני מבקש את הדקות השניות האלה. על ידי פנחס כהן. נכון, פנחס כהן, המורה לטבע. But, okay, sorry.
All we need is a kumzitz.
Okay, correct. Okay, so משוטטי בכרמל, אריה כרוך, later on became הצופים, חגם, חינוך גופני מורחב, the idea about the advanced physical education, gymnastics, the idea of the importance of creating textbooks. Okay, this was something that was led by the Hebrew Reali School. Textbooks in English, textbooks later, I will speak about textbooks in Arabic, textbooks in other subjects. The idea about also cooperation, this or another, with military or paramilitary organization. The first פנימייה צבאית, the Junior Command Preparatory School, is created in Israel in the Hebrew Reali School in 1953, but its origins also go back to the 1940s. The idea of the Gadna, the youth battalion, starts in the Reali. It's a school that if we study this school, we can understand something also about other processes that happen in the education system. And this is why I will argue that it is an interesting case study. I will say something very brief about the history of the Reali, and also very. I'll try to be as brief as I can, even though it's quite an important topic. The Hebrew Reali School, established in 1913, end of 1913, it is part, or it is in the context of the language war that existed in Palestine, Israel, Eretz Israel at the time. The idea was to create an organization, an education system called Technikum, that will be the technological institution in the country, and Avtalia School, also later to be, or Real Schule, will be the schools that will actually feed students into the Technicum, and will be the first, the only Real Schule in the country in the way of teaching this kind of topics. But in the context also of the Zionist movement in the country, the promotion of Hebrew language, and also Hebrew as a language of instruction, there is a strong rejection to the fact that Ezra movement, who were behind the Technicum and the Real Schule, insisted on teaching in German only. And there are so many quotes about it, but German in a way was considered the only language in which a student can actually achieve realistic, modern knowledge about these topics. Like it was unimaginable to teach, for example, engineering in a language which is not German. So there were really heated debates there, and I will cut the debate really short up until the moment that eventually Shmuel Pfezner, who was then in Haifa, sends a telegram to Arthur Biram, who at the time was a 36-year-old educator in Berlin, and told him that the Germans gave up. It's almost a funny quote, הגרמנים הרימו ידיים, because also Biram was in a way a German, but it meant that those who supported German studies in German gave up. And the idea was at the time that the Technikum became Technion, מכון טכנולוגי לישראל, and ריאל שולה became בית הספר הריאלי העברי בחיפה. So there was a shift in language from Technikum to Technion, from Real Schule to Bet Sefer Real Ivri, but obviously it was more than just changing the name. Another interesting thing is, and now I will speak very briefly about Dr. Biram, and again I will be really happy to hear more views of people who are, I'm sure, are better experts like Dr. Mangold-Will, about German Jewish Orientalism, but for him the idea that the school was called the Hebrew Reali School in Haifa, or the Hebrew Reali School in Haifa, for him it was almost a given that the school will also emphasize on Arabic, or that the school will also have ideas, or that the school will also have programs dealing with the people of the Orient. Biram was at the time 36, he studied also in the Hochschule, and he had a PhD from the University of Berlin in Ilm al-Kalam, the Muslim scholastic philosophy. It is interesting to see that from the very, very beginning, from the programma of the school in 1913, there is an emphasis on both Arabic and studies of the Orient, and it is very interesting to see also the reasons that Biram finds for these studies, and again it corresponds very well with German Jewish Orientalism at the time. I will start with the programma. We decided to dedicate much time and effort to the study of human history as our sons grow up and study in a surrounding that is far away and separated from the centers of the world. סביבה רחוקה ונפרדת ממרכזי תבל. We will especially focus on the chronicle of the people of the Orient. ניתן דגש מיוחד ללימודי עמי המזרח. So our students will be able to benefit from the unique historical value of the region in which they are being educated and in which they set their future life. So quite an interesting emphasis from the very beginning on this study. According to the programma and the way that Arabic should be studied, one interesting thing that today sounds almost unimaginable, the part about Arabic, what should be taught in Arabic is written in Arabic. Mm-hmm. Which is, again, today I think usually if you will look at the, Arabic in Jewish schools, for example, many times the program or the skills that should be studied will be written in Hebrew, maybe with Arabic expressions. But over there is a long explanation about how Arabic should be taught, and it is all of the explanations are given in Arabic, and it is said in writing, the pupils will have to learn how to write the letters, firstly, of course, detached and then attached to one another. The reading textbooks will be Miftah al-Qira'a Wahad and Miftah al-Qira'a 2. Both of them are textbooks written by Arab scholars. Speaking, they will have to know how to name the closest things to the pupil and also easy sentences at the beginning. And morphology, they will study verbs and declenation, I know how to say it in Hebrew, of names with the pronouns. أقرب الأشياء إلى التلميذ was kind of the focus, that the students will have to study Arabic and also to understand the closest things to them in life. According to Biram, it was important to study Arabic language for three main reasons. One of them was this, stemmed from his German Oriental approach, which connected grammar studies, classical texts, disciplinary virtues, and Jewish-Muslims interactions. Biram argued that through Arabic studies, the people would be able to learn the compositions and creation of Jewish philosophers and intellectuals who worked in the Islamic and Arab world, especially during the medieval times. This was kind of the first idea about studying Arabic in order to understand also Jewish texts, Jewish philosophies, and also Jewish-Muslim interaction through the ages. The second thing, and this is an interesting concept, is the Latin, studying Arabic as the Latin of the Middle East. Today, and we shouldn't confuse it with today's criticism of Arabic, because if we look at researchers like of Alon Fragman, Alon Ullman, and Professor Muhammad Amara, they speak about that Arabic today has been gone through a process of Latinization. At the time, for scholars like Biram, the idea of Latin was looked in a positive way. Today, it is considered a Latinization because Arabic is being taught almost as a dead language, almost as a language with no speakers. But for Biram and others, it was very much the opposite. They said that in their mindset, studying German, for example, in Germany, needed also that the students will be able to have some kind of a greater umbrella. And that umbrella was of Latin. Meaning that when one will also study Latin, it will be able to connect the language also to sacred text, but also it will be able to explain German better to the students. And Biram insisted that Arabic should be Latin for the Hebrew students in Palestine, so the Hebrew students in Eretz Israel, which was a different concept, but again it is important to look at it from his eyes. Third, and also today it's interesting again to look at it, according to Biram, it will be through Arabic that the students will gain better understanding of the Hebrew language and of the Bible. Today, on one of the calls that called to cancel Arabic as an official status in Israel, there is a lobby that is called the Lobby for the Promotion of the Hebrew Language. Today, the lobby for the promotion of the Hebrew language would like to cancel Arabic as an official language. It's a different kind of mindset, very much different than the one of Dr. Artur Biram. Now, what I would like now to say, and because I'm so bad with time management, so I will tell you what are the things that I would like to say, and then Michael, just please help me with 5 minutes when we have 5 minutes. I would like to go through the different teachers that taught in the Hebrew Reali School in Haifa, beginning with Salim El-Daoudi, followed by Eliyahu Habuba, Professor Martin Meir Plessner, Aviva Landman Torovsky, and finishing with or ending with Professor Meir Kister. Each and all of them are different case studies, obviously, because they are different people, but they represent together, when we look at them together, the tensions within the field of Arabic language studies, because there are also different approaches to the study of Arabic that eventually, and this is kind of the main idea that I would like to stress, that eventually, especially in the 1940s, and especially because of pressures that are coming to the Hebrew Reali schools, also from outside the Reali school, maybe in a similar way to what happened in the Hebrew universities in the 1930s and 40s, there is a pressure to study Arabic as a living language, as a language for tzarachim ma'asiyim, for practical needs, and as a practical language, Aravit Shimushit. These 3 words, Aravit Shimushit, Aravit Chaya, and tzarachim ma'asiyim, were the center of heated debate between these scholars, and also, of course, between other scholars, including Artur Biram and Shlomo Dov Goitan, because they represented different ideas about how Arabic should be studied. And while for one of them, for some, studying Aravit Shimushit, practical Arabic, seemed the most obvious kind of solution for the situation in the country, for others it seems like almost kfira ba'ikar. How do you say
Heresy.
This? Heresy. Thanks. Okay, so I'll start with the first Arabic teacher in the Reali, Salim El-Daoudi. Salim was born in Tzfat. He's the son of Hacham Bashi, of the chief rabbi of Akka. His name was Makhluf El-Daoudi. He taught Arabic and Hebrew before teaching in the Hebrew Reali school, including in Alliance in Tiberia. In fact, we spoke about it yesterday, about Alliance and the knowledge that they would have there. Oh, sorry, later I will also thank all the important people. Sorry, I should have done it before. Now, he spoke Arabic obviously as a first language. He's an Arab Jew. He considered himself also to Arab Jew. And he put emphasis speaking in Arabic also while in class. As soon as he arrives to the school, also he writes in his memoirs that the funniest thing that he has seen is that the doctor is a doctor of Arabic studies, but he cannot speak Arabic. And this he mentioned Dr. Biram, and Biram actually takes private lessons from him really from day one, and he goes, Salim El-Daoudi goes to Biram's house to teach him Arabic. Main kind of landmark is 1914, the beginning of the First World War, which has a big influence on the school, especially because during the war Salim al-Dawoodi has to leave due to personal reasons and others. Also because Arthur Biram is leaving the school for 5 years. He's being recruited by the German army, being a German subject, and he's being positioned first in Afula and then in Istanbul. Apropos the borders that today are a bit, has changed a little. And the teacher that comes after him is Eliyahu Habuba, which represents a similar yet different story. Habuba was born in Damascus, and he is a scholar, meaning he has a BA and an MA, both of them from the university in Beirut. So we have another situation of a person who is an Arab Jew, who also has relationship with Jewish religion as religion. Okay, you did a T, he was a religious Jew. Yet the connection from Arabic was very much part of his identity. Over there, we also had a really good interaction with Arab academia, because he studied in Beirut University. Later on, you will see that there is another connection to Beirut, which will be very different. Michael Dana, who was like a famous student of Eliyahu Habuba, remembers how Habuba was for us a source of Arab atmosphere that were created by his natural and correct pronunciation of the letters in Arabic, by his words and sentences, by his beautiful handwriting on Arabic on the blackboard that made us imitate him, and lastly by his conversations with us in Arabic, which stimulated us to talk in Arabic and made us feel that we were absorbing this knowledge of Arabic from a primal and natural source. Very kind of interesting perception on teaching Arabic as a first language for Habuba. The next on the agenda is the beginning of the British Mandate in Palestine, 1918, 1920, and the idea of crystallization of the education system in the country. This is important because later, and we will not have time for this today, we will have to speak, if we would like to understand what's happening in the Reali, the new evolving relationships between the Hebrew Reali School and הפיקוח על הלימודים, supervision on general on the education system that sits in Jerusalem, people like Yosef Luria, Avinoam Yelin, Shlomo Goitain, and also obviously the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Machon Lelimudei HaMizrach, the School of Oriental Studies. These were three really important centers that corresponded between them, that influenced one another, and that also we have movement of people between these three. Goitain is obviously the best example because he actually was in these three institutions. He was both the Mefakeach, the supervisor on the education system in the Jewish sector. He was both a Bible teacher in the Reali school, and obviously he was one of the most famous scholars here in the center in the Hebrew University. Biram, from the very beginning, he comes back to the school in 1919 after the war. He wants to push forward the idea of creating textbooks, and it's important for him to create textbooks for the Hebrew students in Palestine. Meaning that studying Arabic is miftah al-qira'a wahid or miftah al-qira'a two is not good generally. Secondly, also because the yishuv in the country needs to be able to produce textbooks. Safrut velo sofrim. This was kind of another. He has a lot of anagrams like coins that he puts. So Safrut velo sofrim is definitely one of them. He contacts David Yelin from the Hebrew Teachers College, and together they create the Committee for Arabic Studies in high school. Again, very interesting, because today almost Hebrew and Arabic sometimes go against one another. At the time, it was obvious that the head of the Committee for Arabic Studies will stand the head of the Hebrew Teachers College, the David Yelin. So again, I think that it is important to mention this kind of proximity or mutual interaction between Hebrew and Arabic at the time. I have to, I think, go rather quickly. It's interesting to mention that in this first committee of high school teachers of Arabic, there is a majority of teachers from the Reali school. All of the teachers from Arabic from the Reali school are there. Well, it's both Biram and Habuba, and Bilig, Levi Bilig and Avinoam Yelin are also there. The things that happens next is 1929, and again, I'm running because I want to get also to the three other teachers and the Meuraot Tarpat, the events in Tarpat. there is already an idea, now I'm reading from the sources of the Haganah, that from 1929 the rivalry or the struggle on the hegemony on the city between Arab and Jews started. According to the Haganah, it was in 1929 that the Haganah, or the people in Haifa, moved from defense to attack, or it was the first time in the Yishuv that people moved or shifted from defense to attack. And it's an interesting, or it's an important to mention now, because I think that it will return later on in the end of the 30s and in the 40s, when the conflict will be more heated in Palestine. Having said that, in 1931 we are still continuing with the same push forward of Biram to create textbooks, and the first textbooks for the Hebrew students in Palestine is being created. It is not a textbook that was originally written by its authors, but it was the first one that was designated to the Hebrew student. It was written by Levi Billig and Avinoam Yelin, and it was called Likutei Kri'ah, Mukhtarat al-Qira'ah, and they actually kind of compiled together text, medieval text, Islamic text, and in order to introduce the students who study Arabic to this vast literature. An interesting thing is that they do decide to include there Ibn Battuta's Rihla ila Bilad Palestine, including visits in Al-Ramle, Askilan, and Lid, which today I think would make many people in the Ministry of Education a bit worried. At the time, again, it was obvious that it is important to introduce the students to this kind of knowledge. In 1933, an important and really landmark moment in the history of the school happens when Meir Plessner, at the time Dr. Martin Plessner, arrives from Germany to Palestine. Obviously, the year 1933 is not coincidental. He has to leave his position in Germany after the rise of the Nazi regime to power. But most importantly for us, he also was a person who knew some of the main decision makers here in the country. Biram knew well of Plessner's achievements, and very quickly after he arrives to the country, he's being adopted, inserted into the Hebrew Realist School in Haifa, and Biram from day one is telling him, you will write the first Arabic grammar textbooks for the Hebrew student. And he did. In 1935, less than 2 years after he arrived to the country, this book is being published. It's I think that only this book in itself should be a lecture by itself or an article for itself. It's yesterday we spoke about it in an earlier seminar. First he starts by saying, Lo hayta li mofet. I didn't have any example to write from because I had to create something that is totally new, okay, in the sense of the first Arabic grammar for Hebrew students in Palestine. Secondly, the idea that the whole book is dedicated to Professor Bergstresser, his mentor and his professor from Germany who passed away in 1933, also maybe with relation or with no, it's kind of an open question, to the rise of the Nazi to power. There is a strong emphasis on how Arabic should lead the student closer to the world of Judaism and to the Bible. And obviously there is an interesting reference or isnad, maybe we can say, about the people or the works on which he bases the book on, and it starts with Druckelmann 1918 in Berlin, Reckendorf 1895 in Leiden, another book by Reckendorf. Maybe 4 or 5 of the books were written originally in German, and there is an obvious and very direct act of translation from German into Hebrew, and then modifying it obviously for the Hebrew students. It is definitely a milestone in the study of Arabic in the country. And also Plessner himself mentioned this in a letter to Richard Kibner in the end of in 1936 or 1937, when he says to him, this is a novelty in Palestine, meaning this is kind of an unprecedented publication in Palestine. And I would argue that it is indeed, especially because of its influence on Arabic grammar books later on, books that was published 80 years ago. Yet, the book is published in 1935, and if we all know history, 1936 and 1939 represent another wave of violence in Palestine, and in which not only the tension between Jews and Arabs is heated, also because of the events and because of the violence and because of the strike, the Palestinian strike in the country, and also because it almost sounds metaphorically, but it's true. The two writers of the first Mukhtarat al-Qira, Likutei Kriya, both Levi Bilig and Avinoam Yalin, are being murdered, one in 1936, the other in 1937, in two different incidents, which also kind of really shatters the Oriental community in Israel, meaning the Oriental experts, but also maybe it means something. And again, I don't know if we should take it only metaphorically, but also generally, that also it meant something about this kind of direction of Ibn Battuta, Mukhtarat al-Qira and everything, but also maybe it brought into the mix new consideration, because the tensions between Jews and Arabs in Palestine became very evident, and it had, I will argue, influence on the way that Arabic was perceived, and later on studies. Also, maybe we should mention 1937 and the Peel Committee and the whole idea about the partition of Palestine. You know that if up until that time someone thought about shared spaces, 1937 is almost kind of a course of collision to the war, maybe inevitable war, I don't know, but definitely to ideas that are related to separation in Palestine. I will argue that this moment, that in this moment, end of 1930s and beginning of 1940s up until 1948 are very crucial for the understanding the emergence of this idea called Arabit Shimushit, practical Arabic, and it will be really important also for me to listen to what you think about it, because these terms sometimes are being left unexplained. And so we just know who supports this kind of concept and who are really against it, but sometimes it is not really explained because maybe it is common knowledge for the people who takes part in it. I think that it is really important to mention also processes that are happening here in the Hebrew University, and especially the Hartog Committee in 1934, because I will argue that processes or developments that happen here would have also influence on others. And the Hartog Committee, in a nutshell, says or concludes that the Hebrew University should reconsider the focus of studies in the Oriental Institute, and they should reconsider whether they would like to focus only on the concordancia of Arabic poetry, and also whether they should also start researching the contemporary living Islam, Arab world, culture, social relationships, and so on, which was a shift in focus and also had influence in the situation in the Hebrew Reali School. Yesterday we also read a letter that maybe Amit will elaborate on later on about how Plessner is speaking about pressures that are being put on him to change the system or to change the attitude of the studies. I will leave this to Amit. He definitely writes in another document that school teaching is not science. This is what I had to understand. Habuba is being encouraged to write a new textbook which is called Al-Dalil al-Hadith, the new teacher. So the new system, the practical Arabic, the new approach is there over and over again. The arrival of Aviva Landman is another really important landmark in the history of the school, especially because Aviva Landman, later Aviva Landman Torovsky, was the first Arabic teacher in the school.
Torovsky Landman. The other way around.
Okay, Aviva Torovsky. Okay.
Her husband was.
The husband is Amos Landman, you're right. Aviva Torovsky Landman, she was actually the first Arabic teacher who was a graduate of the Hebrew Reali School. So there was already something there in the sense of that while Habuba and Dawoodi had really different background coming from Arab Jewish background, and Plessner came from Jewish German background, here we have some kind of what Biram would later call the first Sabra teacher that we have in the school, that is both outspoken, that understand kind of the challenges that we have in the country, and I would say not coincidentally, also Aviva Torovsky pushes forward the idea or that the need to teach Arabic differently, and there is a lot of tension between the teachers there. And I watch, but I will leave this also for the discussion. Also, I will say that Aviva Torovsky conducts her master in Beirut. This is where she meets Amos Landman, and there are all kind of hints that she also started connection with the political department of the Zionist executive, meaning that for her maybe end of 1930s, beginning of 1940s, the connection between Arabic and, let's put it vaguely, national considerations are becoming very clear. Also, she starts, okay, there are all kinds of projects that are starting at the time in the school, including bringing Yalkut HaMizrach HaTichon, the Middle East collection, which was a geopolitical issue journal, הקורס לערבית מורחבת, the idea of the rise of הלשון השימושית, ערבית כלשון שימושי, emphasis on משה בריל's אוצר מילות היסוד בעיתונות, vocabulary that is more related to newspapers. We have more and more pressures coming from the department in Jerusalem, from the education department, or Ministry of Education, by Ben Ze'ev, saying that the Reali school should move into practical Arabic. We need Arabic לצרכים מעשיים של ממש, for real practical needs. And I will say so on and so forth. The arrival of Kister, Professor Kister at 1945, when Plessner moves back to the Hebrew University, creates first more tensions because obviously he didn't agree with the way that Aviva Torovsky was leading, but also I would say Kister, maybe because of his life experiences and also because of him also visiting Beirut, working for the Polish embassies there, and also having some connection to political-oriented topics. At the end of the day, by the end of 1940s, the idea is that the Reali school is leading a new and pioneering way of studying Arabic, which is called Arabit Shimushit, which is being made by three different scholars, Aviva Landon, Aviva Torovsky, Eliyahu Habuba, and Kister, which together create this Arabit Shimushit. And again, I will be really happy to try and understand with you what does it mean. I visited the Hebrew Reali School a week ago. I will end with this anecdote, and it was for different reasons for a meeting, and there were a lot of posters in the class. The class is called Dar al-Hikmah. Every class has a name. The class of Arabic studies is called Dar al-Hikmah, and there was one big poster on which it was written "Ihtarum al-nas yahtarimuk," and then in brackets "Zeu mechubad mechabed et habriot." And I would say that this is a legacy of Plessner in the sense of trying to find the Jewish origin for the Arab text. The name of the room is Dar al-Hikmah, but there were at least 6 posters of Telem, Tipuach Limudei Mizrachanut. It's a military intelligence unit in which it was written, for example, במודיעין אתה יודע שהראש שלך קובע. In the military intelligence, you know that your mind is what really makes a difference. So it was, I would argue that that Arabic studies generally, but in this kind of school, it was, I know it's anecdotal and stuff, but it was very clear that there was that there is either tension or very different approaches to the study of Arabic, and they still coexist uneasily, as once Liora Halperin wrote about the situation in Palestine in 1940s. But I would say that, and this is now I'm bringing more from the book, but that there were more emphasis from military and political consideration, but we'll leave it for later. Thank you very much.
So we have 20 minutes for questions.
Can you stand?
Okay, the term Arabit Shimushit, practical Arabic. I thought maybe the distinction should be between let's compare it to English. You learn English also for fun, to understand music, culture in the wider sense, but there's no the real distinction is not between classical and practical. The classical and practical are the same thing. You're part of the same thing. And the practical actually symbolizes that Arabic can be used for security reasons, mainly, but it's not a language of culture in the wider sense. My suggestion.
Maybe Professor Friedman or Milson can say something about the Arabit
would
Shimushit
like to
before. Maybe.
Ask you a question and make a remark on what you spoke. Not a remark, an anecdote which I learned 30 years ago. The question is, you spoke about the tendency to make usable Arabic more prominent in the 1940s. But I think you couldn't speak a great deal about Kister because you were ordered by the chairman to stop.
Yeah.
But how do you explain this? I mean, Kister is probably the antithesis of these usable Arabic.
I might ask you the
I
same
can
question,
tell
but
you,
I
I
will.
can tell you a lot about how Kister taught Arabic. But you have not mentioned the anthology which he prepared, which is real antithesis of any security, any security threats. And I would like to say something about your lecture. You used the word Orientalists many times, but you didn't give us an explanation what is Orientalism in your usage. But I would like to tell you an anecdote. I had to
Can I just say that I was drawing somewhat on the title of the conference, and I assumed by that I meant the academic study of the Orient in the sort of old school sense.
But you know, it has many connotations.
It absolutely does.
And I would like to tell you what I learned 30 years ago when I had to give a speech on the 60th anniversary of the Institute of Oriental Studies, now Asian and African Studies. This is a story from the late 1920s. And when the Institute was established, it received a congratulatory letter from Louis Massignon, who later became one of the leading scholars of Islamic things. And there is a congratulation, and there is a suggestion there. What should be the first research project of this institute? And he said, you should transliterate the great works of Judeo-Arabic into Arabic letters, so that the Arabs know how much the Jews contributed to their culture. There was a meeting to discuss this proposal. I don't remember the list of all the people who were there, but probably Goitein, Leo Meyer, maybe Banet already also. And here is the decision. We did not come to the Middle East to teach the Arabs. We came to the Middle East to study from the Arabs. And therefore, instead of this transliteration, two other projects were decided upon: the concordance of the classical Arabic poetry and a critical edition of the historian Balazuri, who died in 870. So I don't know whether it fits to the term Orientalism, but it is a telling story. Incidentally, the transliteration of these great works of Judeo-Arabic have been accomplished since then. Morene Vuchim has been produced in Arabic letters in Turkey, and just very recently a PhD candidate at the Hebrew University transliterated the Kuzari into Arabic letters. So, you know.
Can I just
This
say
is
in
what I
response?
want to know.
Can I just say in response to that it's a persistent tension. So certainly in the period that I study, the question of whether the purpose of Jews working with Arabic is to effectively teach themselves Europeans who are not in touch enough with their Semitic authenticity, or whether their goal is to bring their European values, however you want to call them, to the East, which is lacking them, right? And both of those things are happening at the same time and are sometimes at cross purposes. Thank you for that anecdote.
Professor Milson, do you have a remark?
Yeah, I wanted a remark on the teaching of Arabic in the reality school, which may change to some extent the picture that was drawn by Dr. Mendel. I'm a product of the reality school, but I'm familiar not only from my own studies, also from my family background, because my older sister studied in the Reali, my mother was a pupil in the Reali school, and a great admirer of Dr. Bion. So, and I knew the teachers, or some of the teachers mentioned here. It's true, Biram wanted Arabic in the Reali. He attached great importance to the teaching of Arabic. And you mentioned that, and there is no need to elaborate. It's also true that despite his efforts to learn Arabic, to speak Arabic, he did not succeed in that. Not the only one who does not succeed, despite his efforts. But he helped, he tried to develop it, he supported the publication of school books, textbooks, especially encouraged Dr. Plessner, at the time Dr. later Professor Plessner, to write the grammar book and so on. He also imported or accepted Kister. And this is the watershed, because the efforts of Biram to make Arabic a serious subject in Reali were not successful until Kister came. As with many subjects, it is a person who makes the difference. A person, not a theory. And how do I prove it? In sort of empirical facts. Not one of the teachers you mentioned before continued as an academic in Arabic. At one given time, 17 of the pupils of Kister in Reali held academic positions in Arabic and Islamic studies in Hebrew universities. And I said in Hebrew universities in the country, in Israeli universities. I detailed all of this in an article published some 20 years ago about the beginnings of Arabic and Islamic studies in Israel. Abba Shela was not a student. I said that the students, pupils who graduated from Reali school, not pupils of Aviva Turovsky, not pupils of Eliyahu Chabuba, and not pupils of Meir Plessner, did not continue as academics. In one given time, pupils from Reali school who studied under Kister held academic positions in Israel. Unique, in other words, and as I don't know how you classify Kister, German philology or usable Arabic?
No, German philology, but I will explain maybe.
So maybe
Galician Jew.
Two products of Kister.
Galician Jew, he was from Galicia.
Yeah.
Don't forget that
Okay,
either.
He was born in Galicia and trained in Jerusalem. True, his mentor was Banet, who is clearly representative of German philology. But Kister insisted on teaching Arabic as a living language. And if you read my little note about Kister, you see how he taught us, Johan and myself and many others, to make the transfer from classroom Arabic to spoken Arabic.
And
Yoni, please.
He used to bring to class an Arab teacher who taught spoken Arabic and also taught Arab singing. He was a huge man with a huge voice, you know. And he used to come once a week. And also the Menachem's, in Menachem's years, there was a month in an Arab village, right? In my time, I don't know why they stopped. But in his time, they went to al-Fahim.
But later, I went to al-Fahim. Later on, I heard it just a couple of days ago, when Kister was inspector in the Ministry of Arabic, he made it also from Tel Aviv schools. They went. It was a program all over the country. Anyway.
Yoni, please.
Okay, but maybe we'll have another one.
Kister was the founder of the Megama Aravit.
Megama Mizrachanit.
It's true, Biram supported him. Biram, and this is also very interesting, Biram, who couldn't speak Arabic, but encouraged Kister, supported his unusual move of sending his children to villages, and gave him special conditions for his work in the early school.
He was funding a course with 5 students. In my Mahzor, we were 5, including one Arab student from Kufr Yasif, whom later Kister called a traitor, because he stopped studying Arabic and went to study medicine. High treason.
Yoni, please.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry,
yes.
I apologize, I must leave. It's fascinating, but I have another meeting.
Okay, well, but I will find a way also to sit with you again.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the question about the enigma. Well, also there was also a question there whether practical Arabic, maybe as Arabic not as a language of culture. Again, I would say I don't know. It is an open question, because sometimes when we look at practical Arabic, Arabit Shimushit, we go and say, okay, it's Arabit shemishtamshim ba, it's Arabit that you speak with. Maybe it's Ami, Arabit meduberet. I have a feeling that it was not only Amiya, it was maybe also Amiya, but it also included, for example, living language in the sense of language that is contemporary today, that is, I don't know, that is related maybe newspapers, or that is
Forced us to
correct. But I will say Kister for me, and this will be in a way, either it's because we are human beings and we are not linear, and that it doesn't mean that if you do one thing it means that you are actually opposing the other. It is in a way an enigma, because yes, you're right. Kister was a great scholar, and the ontologies that he wrote, and obviously focus on Arabic. And who am I also, finished a PhD 2 days ago, to start saying things about one's scholarship. But again, Kister, for example, established the Megama Mizrachanit in the 1950s, 1954, which was a course of study that was initiated and was conducted in relationship with Hayoetz L'Inyanei Aravim, the Prime Minister's office, and with the military intelligence also. And for example, then for example, you will ask, and then if I may, I will ask, for example, what would Professor Plesser would do? For example, how will he take part in this kind of initiative of, for example, bringing together Arabic for scholarship and Arabic for military intelligence, without saying that they contrast or that they contradict each other or not? And obviously Kister believed, and I also spoke, of course, with Professor Kister's son, who is Professor Kister himself, who told me that for his father, teaching the Islam Kadum, ancient Islam, was important in order to understand contemporary Islam and contemporary Arab societies, that there was no contradiction there. And again, I think that I feel that if I will answer, it will take a long time, so we can maybe push it forward.
It would be also interesting to examine the political views of Goitein, of Plessner, Horowitz, Kister.
I agree that you said it, then it will not seem that I planted this question.
Maybe two very short comments say that what I think is very important is to recognize that it's not. It is and it is not something unique about Palestine. This trend to do something which is oriented to contemporary developments, and it is the development of German Orientalism, by the way, in Germany the same years. So it's something which is not unique. This kind of ambivalence to deal with the Orient as a contemporary phenomenon. I think it's very important because we always believe it's very unique. Our conflict is unique and our attitude is unique, so it's not so unique. And it's still, of course, unique. And in the sense of this uniqueness, I think that for sure Kister was a very influential person. But at the same time, it was the move from the pre-state to the state. And once it was the state, it was a career. And I think that we have to think about it. All of a sudden, this would be my assumption. Arabic language was an opening for all kinds of career, and in this sense, it was easier to promote learning of Arabic language. And I think that the person and the structure and the moment in history all together make the kind of a change, and we will have a lot the opportunity to deal with Plesner again. Plesner was forced to be a school teacher. He was this was not what he meant when he actually went to university. So, of course, there is also the question of motivation in the profession. If you are forced to do it because you are a refugee, or you see it as a kind of
Vocation.
A vocation. Yes. So.
Just on behalf of Arthur Biram, his first teacher, I believe, was Moritz Steinschneider. And it's interesting because Moritz Steinschneider is associated with the comment to give Judaism a decent burial. So clearly, as a headmaster, Biram was not interested in giving Arabic, perhaps intertwined with Hebrew, a decent burial. I wonder if one of the central themes of Steinschneider's work was the Jews as transmitters. And I wonder if that also as a bibliographer, and also the way he cataloged Latin as well as Arabic. You mentioned in your talk that Biram's attitude was that Arabic should be the Latin of the Middle East in a positive way. I wonder if any of that comes up in his writings. A certain debt owed to Steinschneider. It was perhaps sweet revenge, because one thing Steinschneider was not was a Zionist. The second remark, I must perhaps, I have a somewhat different perspective on Salim al-Dawdi. You say he was an Arab Jew. That's I think, a very loaded term, and it also doesn't quite capture his life experience. He was part of a Mughrabi Jewish diaspora, born in Tiberias. He was the son of a rabbi. He was also a failed rabbi himself. And his goal was to be a Hebrew novelist. And he meets Nachum Slushitz, who writes the first history of Hebrew literature, who says, don't bother. Somebody, by the way, made a remark like that to Goitein many years later about a Hebrew play. Try something else. And as a result, he becomes an Arabic teacher. He also is a student at Tiferet Yisrael, which is the one attempt, a Jewish attempt, to produce Arab Jews, if you will, who were fluent in Fusha. And so it's sort of, I think, a little more of a complex story than just another Arab Jew, if I may. That's it. Thank you.
I would like to ask Dr. Halperin, first of all, say thank you for this very interesting paper. You referred to the hegemonic institution studying Arabic, more or less to the left wing, what we call today the left wing. What about the revisionist movement? Were there any parallel attempts at studying Arabic? And another question: what kind of Arabic was studied in these courses directed by the Jewish Agency?
And maybe I'll just add one question to both of you. In all these discussions by Biram and their writings and memoirs or whatever, was there a discussion about who should be taught Arabic, or was it? It was. I mean, they thought that all Zionists should know Arabic, all children, or was it just like a certain elite?
Yeah, those are very good questions. So Jabotinsky actually made a statement at one point that there's no need to study Arabic. Right? So long as Arabs aren't studying Hebrew, there's no need to study Arabic.
So now there is some need. The Arabs speak Hebrew like...
Well, now it's different. Now it's different. I can't remember what year he said that. And yet, right, despite that comment, Arabic is studied in these military or proto-military intelligence sectors. So there's kind of an ideology that they are not relevant for day-to-day purposes, and yet they are relevant to the extent that there's a conflict with them. On the labor side of things, there's a totally different ideology. That is to say, there's a misunderstanding. So long as they come to understand that which we really mean to do, which is good things for them in the land, then everything will be all right. I presented a little bit of the tension over what kind of Arabic is studied, right? You can see that there's a strong sense that colloquial Arabic is key, and yet there's also this influx of influence from the academic establishment, and Be'eri is bringing the academic establishment essentially to the kibbutzim and saying, actually we need some of that authenticity, I guess in quotes, in order to have like a fully rigorous program. As far as the schools were concerned, this is your question. I write about this in a separate place, that there's all sorts of debates about what Arabic should be studied. There's a sense that there's not enough time in the day to study it all, and yet no kind of Arabic is fully sufficient, which partly explains, you probably write about this a lot, Yoni, it partly explains the lack of coherence of Arabic educational programs.
Well, I'll start with Schneider, whom I think that I haven't seen Biram's referring to him vis-a-vis pedagogical motivations, programs. It could be also with relation to the comments. Yet, as Jews as transmitters, or generally studying about this was very much part of his pedagogical.
That's typical Jewish Orientalists in Germany. They all try to see the Jews as transmitters, so it's not very special.
Biram was Steinschneider's pupil.
Yes, but he was also a pupil of August Fischer in Leipzig and of Eduard Sachau in Berlin, and they all were thinking in this category that the Jews could be the transmitters between the Orient and the Occident. So, and that's the reason why they promoted their Jews. Sachau, of course, by Fischer, it's a bit different, but Sachau, that's the reason why he promoted Jewish students, because he were transmitters between them.
And about Salim al-Dawoodi, I think, well, it's a good question. I would say that to say that he is an Arab Jew is maybe a political statement, as much as to say that he's not an Arab Jew, because the fact that a person could be both Zionist and an Arab Jew today sounds almost as something that is impossible. I think at the end of the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, it was very much possible. Zionism was also understood differently. Salim al-Dawoodi believed that he needs to translate Hebrew literature into Arabic, so the Arab world will learn also about. Yeah,
that's his dream.
On the other hand, he taught Hebrew and Arabic not only in Zionist schools. He taught in Tanta, in Beirut, in Damascus, in Cairo. Like he was very much. He felt himself as part of the region, and I think for myself, it makes him a person with an Arab Jewish identity. But again, I would say it's not that I say that. This is how I saw things. I think it was indeed really important to mention that processes or development of Arabic studies as in a new approach, following what you said, did not happen only in Palestine. It happened even in Germany and also in the United States, in the US, meaning new approaches to the study of the language and maybe trying also to connect it to contemporary affairs. It's not what I try to say, that the Oriental study, or the Oriental study as a school of thought, has been changed over the last 100 years, and there was also changes in other schools, not only here in the country. Who is going to study Arabic? In the reality, it was very straightforward. Every student who are Bnei Haaretz, who were born in the country, it means that they have to study Arabic because this is the language of the Haaretz. So if you're originally from Germany, you should study German and Hebrew. But if you were born in the country, obviously you have to study both Hebrew and Arabic. I remember also, this is following what Liora said, that in the 1940s there was a project called Limud Aravit Banekudot, which was a project of the political department that every Nekudat Gvul, every village, a Jewish village that is bordering with an Arab village, will have to have at least 3 speakers of Arabic, and this was funded by the political department.
Yes.
And the idea was, and then again it is up for one interpretation. One can say this is studying the language of the neighbor in 1945 in order to make sure that they will have no tensions between them, and that on the other hand it means that in order to maintain this important villages that were also controversial because they were bordering in Arab villages and so on and so forth, in order to enable the continuation of this Zionist enterprise, it is important to weaken possible rejections to them, and this will be one way to another way to look at it. But in the rally, it was very straightforward.
Well, in practice, it was
It was funded by Eliyahu Sasson, המחלקה הערבית, המחלקה הפוליטית. So I would say it did not have only civil kind of, let's say. It has also strategic, so to speak, importance. That 3 men will know Arabic in the border villages, לימוד ערבית בנקודות.
But there was some debate about, so the gymnasiot generally taught Arabic. There was a debate about whether the Amami schools, non-academic, I guess you might say, track, like, what about them? So there's all sorts of discussion in the Hebrew press at the time about, well, what about these people who aren't going on to kind of higher academic achievements? Is it necessary? Is it optional? Arabic or French is sometimes the way that it goes. So that's an interesting discussion of its own.
Okay, so we thank our speakers.
Easter used to tell me that according to Iran, there are only 2 important subjects in the curriculum, which is mathematics and Arabic. All the rest
Not medicine,
I didn't hear that.
because he said that in Arab, you're meant to be a doctor.